always just wants to talk about the best of a category. The best car, the best workout to lose weight, the best horse in Uma Musume, the best TV show to watch. Today, we're here to do the absolute opposite and talk about the worst maps in Fire Emblem history. I've picked one map from each game in the series to talk about in release order, so let's just get started. Fire Emblem 1 and Fire Emblem 11 do not share a lot of design DNA, but somehow they managed to share the exact same worst map, Wooden Cavalry. And what's funny is that this map is terrible in two completely different ways depending on which version you're playing. In FE1, ballisticians are basically just archers who woke up one morning and decided that movement was optional. They have two range weapons, they hit like wet noodles, and they pose absolutely no threat because their movement is also pretty bad. As a result, this entire map just becomes a slow, plodding march across a giant empty field while these sad little siege engines plink at you for single-digit damage. There's no tension, there's no puzzle, there's not even a gimmick to involve yourself with. It's just bland, mechanically hollow, and you could basically just replace it with a Death Stranding segment with how much you're just walking from point A to point B. Between FE1 and FE11, I think the Ballista users watched a few too many of those Andrew Tate core grind set funk remix TikToks about how you need to get your money up, not your funny up, because they are way stronger in this game. They're long range, they're super accurate, and they're positioned in a way that makes every single tile feel like it's under surveillance from the Eye of Sauron. Instead of boredom, you get this feeling of paranoia. Instead of dull stroll, you get a map where stepping forward even one tile feels like you're volunteering to be executed. And because FE11's AI sometimes behaves like it's reading from a script written in a language that nobody speaks, you can't even reliably predict how the enemies will react. The result is a map that manages to be bad in two unique and opposite directions. One version is mind-numbingly boring, and the other is a tedious exercise in damage control. The only thing that really makes this chapter worth playing is the boss quote, "Take this, elephant." Mystery of the Emblem and New Mystery of the Emblem share a lot of maps, but Abducted Princess stands out as the one that really tests your patience, and not in a good way. The map layout looks interesting at first. A big central island, a boss surrounded by cavaliers, Mathis being Mathis, and Draco Knights circling like vultures. But the moment you start playing, the cracks blow up in your face. The biggest issue of this map is this forced detour that you have to take with Marth. Palla, who is probably the best unit in the game, spawns in the top right corner, desperately trying to defend a village from a horde of thieves. Meanwhile, Marth is at the absolute bottom, complete opposite side of the map, and he has to take the long trek all the way around to get to the village that Palla is protecting. This is to recruit Julian, a character who you normally would be able to just ignore and let die, but is absolutely necessary for you to get the true ending in this game, so you can't really let him die in the same way that you could let a jobber like Warren in the previous chapters die. Then, after finally recruiting Julian, you think after all that annoyingness, you're done with the chapter's annoying part. You think you're free. Bitch, that's halfway. You gotta go all the way back around again. It's not tense, it's not clever, it's just a tax on your time. This map has all the ingredients for something cool. Draco Knights, split objectives, a village under threat, but the execution just turns it into a total chore. It's a map that mistakes long for engaging, and the player's the one that has to pay the price. Genealogy is kind of a strange game to critique on this list because its maps are so enormous. If you pick a bad map, you're basically condemning 8% of the entire game. So instead, I'm focusing on the worst castle-to-castle segment of a map, the final castle of Chapter 1. Chapter 1 starts off really strong. You get new units, Eldigan makes his first major appearance, you get some great world building, you have to run away with Ideen and Dew in that little bit of that cramped hallway feeling, run through the villages, get to Sigurd as fast as possible, you have to recruit Ira, and you meet Deirdre. It's a chapter that feels like it's building towards something really meaningful, and then you hit the forest. The final stretch of the chapter forces your mostly mounted army to slog through dense woods at 2 tiles per turn if you're lucky. This alone would be annoying, but the game piles on several additional tasks that need to happen simultaneously that just don't make the experience any more fun. Aideen has to reach Jamka to recruit him, which already is risky because Jamka's skill set makes him kind of uniquely threatening as a unit that's able to attack so many times with his killer bow that he's even able to take out your best units like Sigurd if he attacks enough times and gets lucky enough. Lex, another mounted unit, has to detour through the forest to the side of the lake to get the Brave Axe from a hidden event and probably head all the way back to finish up his arena run because it's really hard for him to finish it without it and it makes him way better with it. Deirdre needs to move up through the forest to silence the boss, otherwise he's going to just absolutely tear your army a new one. And all of this is happening while your cavalry, the backbone of your army and the most important units you have, are crawling through the trees like it's fucking Metal Gear Solid 3. It's a segment that completely kills the pacing of the chapter. The narrative is ramping up, the stakes are rising, and the gameplay just slams on the brakes. Instead of a climactic push towards the final castle, you get a slow, tedious march that punishes you for using the units the game has encouraged you to rely on up until this point. The forest segment isn't just unfun, it actively undermines the strengths of Genealogy's design as a story gameplay coherent game. A remake could absolutely fix this, but in the original and right now, it's a total momentum killer that drags down an otherwise excellent chapter. Thracia is a game that I, against my best interests, absolutely adore. I love it. I love its chaos, its unpredictability, its willingness to throw curveballs at the player, and its sheer character. But even in a game that's built on controlled suffering, Chapter 24X of this game stands out as a step too far. Strike 1, it's a Fog of War map. Thracia Fog, folks. There's a reason that Thracia Fog has not come back to this day. I don't mind Fog of War in and of itself, but Thracia Fog it's a little much. Strike 2, it's filled with warp tiles that'll teleport your units into a prison gay baby jail area full of enemy status saves. And once you're in that prison, there's actually no way to leave unless somebody rescues you with a staff. Strike 3. It's an escape map. Because of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Thracia and Kaga looked at the situation and said, what if we just, made it a little bit worse? Thematically, the chapter is about Leaf trying to rescue Avel from being turned to stone. It's a compelling narrative hook, but the gameplay execution is so punishing that it overshadows the emotional weight of the moment. You're navigating through darkness, avoiding warp traps, dealing with status spam, and trying to keep your army from being scattered around the map like confetti. And the reward? Well, the reward's that you get Avel back. Except, Avel's not good anymore, is she? You've got Sed, you've got Gulzus, you've got Asvel, you've got Finn, you've got Dean, you've got Orson and Halvan fully trained up, you've still got Dagdar, you've got Dermot with his decent enough stats. If you've trained up Marita, she's absolutely busted, but even if she's not, it's middling. Olwen's kind of a cope unit, but if you've trained her up, she's pretty good. Leaf's also gotten his glow up, and his stats are good enough to make it work. You've got Linoan, who's just a great unit and also has great staff access. You even got units like Ralph that can fill up your party if you need to, and the most important thing is, every single one of the units that I've just mentioned is better than Avel. Avel is a unit that just falls off, and would have fallen off if you recruited her back in chapter 15 or so, but unfortunately she joins you back the literal chapter before endgame. It's just such a terrible price for this already awful map to deal with. This chapter is overtuned, unfair, and if you stumble into it without knowing what you're in for, you might just quit the literal chapter before the final chapter of the game. Thracia is full of brilliant, off-the-wall, chaotic design choices, but this one is just bad. In my time, I have been known to hate on FE6 a lot, and that's not going to change in this video, but this hatred is not because I haven't played this game enough. I have a ton of playthroughs in FE6, and I can tell you for a fact that Chapter 14 of FE6 is just not a good map. To dig deep and explain why, we have to talk about the baseline concept behind why FE6 is designed in the way that it is. FE6, from a broad strokes perspective, is a game that prides itself on unreliability and forcing the player to adapt to that unreliability. Units have terrible accuracy because weapons are wholly unreliable, and enemies have sky-high avoid, there's a ton of random crit thrown around, and you simply don't have the tools frequently to craft truly reliable strategies. This is standard FE6 fare, and to be completely honest, it's not a bad base level concept for a game. A lot of the best Fire Emblem gameplay frequently results from situations where players, either through their own volition or through luck, put themselves into tough situations where they might lose a unit, and through their own cunning or intellect are able to find a way out of that situation. FE6 tries to increase the frequency of these situations by lowering the overall reliability, which is not necessarily a bad way to approach it as long as there's enough failsafes that it doesn't get super frustrating. However, Chapter 14 of this game really takes it way too far. Chapter 14 is a Fog of War desert chapter, and that's enough to, I'm sure, put many of you into hysterics. But that's not enough. You also have to beat this chapter within a certain amount of turns to get to the Gaiden chapter, and that's still not enough for this game apparently. You get a really bad unit on this chapter, Sophia, that you need to keep safe and bring to the very end of the chapter to receive one of the few guiding rings in this game. And finally, if all of that wasn't already enough, there's a bunch of hidden items, because this is a desert chapter in a GBA Fire Emblem, that you just can't know about unless you look it up ahead of time or luck into it. The main issue with Fog of War in Fire Emblem is that Fire Emblem gameplay is often a direct communication between the player and the developer. The developer's goal is to provide you with some information and setup on a chapter, and it's your goal to interpret that information and setup within the context of the game and determine the best course of action. From that point on, the developer is going to have designed the game to reward you if your interpretation was correct based on their vision of the game, and punish you if your interpretation was not correct based on their vision of the game. For example, in a chapter like Engage's Chapter 11, there's powerful enemies bearing down on you, it's an escape chapter, and there's a relatively limited amount of time you have to beat it. So, what the developer is trying to portray and communicate to you there is that you need to get a move on and beat the chapter quickly. You are punished by facing down waves and waves of super powerful enemies that can easily beat you up if you don't interpret that properly and decide to try to take it slowly. Fog of War, however, destroys this dynamic. Fog of War means that the player is not allowed to receive accurate information about the task, which means that there's no context that the player has for what a reasonable action might be right up until it's time for punishment to be doled out. Even with torches and thieves and playing as well as possible, there is simply no way for a player to be confident that their actions were not incorrect because of an outside factor that they had no way of knowing about, like a wyvern waiting in the fog. This frequently results in slower gameplay because the slowest gameplay represents the highest chance of success in the most possible game states. For example, if you turtle properly, even if there is a wyvern in the fog, you're likely going to succeed as your formation will keep you safe. Now, if you want to encourage this slow, tense, methodical gameplay, that's a matter of preference, and a developer could very well encourage that and use it to make a more interesting Fog of War mission, but in this chapter, there's a fairly strict timed objective and a ton of extremely valuable items that you just have to get before that objective runs out. You will be forced into risks that you just can't evaluate reasonably, because you just have to take those risks to get through the chapter quickly enough. Even with a promoted milady carrying your thief, there is, again, no feedback to know that there isn't just an Air Caliber mage or a berserker in the fog ready to execute her because of her speed penalty. What really takes it even further and over the top, and has to be talked about too, is hidden items. I brushed up on it a little bit earlier, but hidden items are such a god-awful mechanic. Nothing about the way that they've been implemented in Fire Emblem history is even remotely interesting. You either have to know about it ahead of time and benefit from it, or you don't have any chance of getting an item that other players could get for free. Even if you know that they exist because you randomly ran into some during a normal playthrough, there's no guarantee to pick them up except with a thief in FE6, and you don't know where the rest are. A solid halfway through the game, found in the hidden items on this map is the one and only warp staff in the entire campaign, which is a borderline necessity so that you do not have to suffer through even more dogshit maps in the game like 16x or 21x. FE6 Chapter 14 is a chapter that tries to have its cake and eat it too, and as a result, it absolutely will be on this list. If I could give a map a negative score, I'd give it to this chapter. When I was originally planning the script, I expected FE7 to be kind of a difficult game to pick a bad chapter for, as I tend to have pretty good memories of it overall. But when I went back to it, there are seriously a few outliers that are terrible. Crazed Beast is a chapter that just exists to fuel your units with wave upon wave of horrendously weak enemies. Cog of Destiny is a route chapter that should have never, ever been a route chapter. And Sands of Time is a god-awful, boring defend chapter that takes place literally 2 chapters before endgame. But I had to give the price to chapter 23X, Genesis. This chapter is one of the Kishina chapters where there's a large segment of the map where nobody can use magic. The idea is supposed to be that the enemy's army is full of powerful mages that can only use their magic some of the time because they're silenced most of the time, so you're forced to improvise and move your party around to take out magic users while you can. Cool idea. Slight issue: Hector Hard Mode only gives you 8 unit slots and Kishina just leaves in 5 turns, and the increased number of enemies turns those 2 factors combined with it into a total nightmare. A big problem you'll often see on this chapter is that even dealing with enemy mages when they're silenced isn't always easy, because a lot of enemy mages slow themselves down with their tomes but lose that speed penalty when they're silenced. The sheer amount of action economy required on this map is just ridiculous, with many of the passages between rooms having breakable walls or doors which require your actions to open. And with only 5 units on each side of the chapter, you will be resetting a lot. This chapter really is a shame because it could have been a ton of fun if it was just handled properly, but it's a little too frustrating in a few too many ways, and it just ends up breaking the camel's back and just feeling awful to play. If you're one of the 3 card-holding Sands of Time defenders in FE7, and you were glad it didn't make it onto this list, you're going to be pretty disappointed with what's coming up. Sacred Stones is a pretty breezy game overall, and even its harder maps tend to feel more like power fantasies than genuine challenges. But Last Hope manages to be the worst of both worlds. It's not difficult enough to be engaging, and it's not simple enough to be relaxing. It's just there. A big, foggy, sluggish speed bump right before the emotional and story climax. This is a Fog of War defense chapter, and it throws a massive number of enemy units at you. And the green units are the worst offenders. They don't meaningfully contribute to the fight, but they take forever to move, clog up the map something fierce, and waste your time every single turn. It's like the game decided to simulate a Houston traffic crossing. Fog of War makes everything on this chapter worse. Fog of War is already kind of a controversial mechanic, but combining it with a defend chapter is kind of a recipe for frustration. You're supposed to hold the line, but you can't see what's coming. You're supposed to protect the NPCs, but they wander around like they're on a sightseeing tour. You're supposed to feel tension, but instead you feel irritation. And the real problem is placement. This map appears right before the final stretch of the game, right before the emotional payoff of the game happens, where the Erica, Ephraim, Innes, Tana, Leon, Polycule finally meets up and figures out what each of their situationships means for the broader world of Renee. The story is ramping up, but then the game just slams on the brakes right at the end and just forces you to babysit green units in the dark for 10 turns. It's not challenging, it's not interesting, it's not memorable, it's just a time waster that kills the pacing of an otherwise reasonably tightly structured endgame. Have you ever wanted to fight 40 billion enemies? Have you ever thought it would be awesome if breaking your weapons due to sheer enemy density was a game mechanic? No? Well, too bad, because Clash in Path of Radiance is a chapter expressly designed to waste as much goddamn time as possible, and with just one installation of $200 to get a copy of the game, you too can spend 4 hours on this chapter. Path of Radiance is one of the most consistently well-designed games in the series, but Clash is such a glaring exception to this. This is a map that feels like it was designed by someone who thought that quantity over quality was a good thing. On normal and easy, the map already has over 50 enemies. That's a lot, but manageable, especially in a late game chapter. On Maniac mode, however, the enemy count skyrockets to 118. 118! Birthright's able to get away with this because it has a button that you can press on enemy face to skip the enemy phase. You have no such luxury in Path of Radiance. These enemies aren't necessarily weaklings either. Their strength stats might not be enough to pose a meaningful threat to your army, but their bulk means that you're going to be spending some time on each of these enemies. And the game basically just decides to tell you to deal with like 40 of these guys at the same time. The map itself is a giant flat rectangle with basically no terrain. No choke points, no formations, no environmental gimmicks, just a big fucking field. It's like Gaiden map design, dude. And because the boss is on the opposite side of the map, you're either forced to slog through the entire army or attempt some kind of rescue chain miracle to get Ike to the seize point instantly. Weapon durability starts to become a real problem here. Even your strongest 1 to 2 range weapons will break under the sheer volume of combat. You're not making tactical decisions, you're just trying to survive the onslaught without running out of hand axes. The worst part is the pacing. The map just takes forever. Even if you play aggressively, even if you optimize your movement, and even if you could skip animations, which you can't, you're still looking at a multi-hour commitment. It's not challenging in a satisfying way, it's challenging in a why am I still here? Just to suffer kind of way. It tests your emotional and mental mettle, not your gameplay skill, which I don't really think is something we should be aspiring to in Fire Emblem. Radiant Dawn is genuinely one of my favorite games of all time. When it's good, it's incredible. But I do have to admit, when it's bad, it's really bad. Each part of this game is relatively different in how it plays out and how it feels to play, so instead of just giving you one bad chapter for the entire game, I'm gonna give you one bad chapter for each part, not counting the tower. For part 1, I've picked chapter 1-9, the chapter where you have Micaiah and the Black Knight. Part 1 is an interesting self-contained, tiny little Fire Emblem campaign in and of itself, similar to something like Lin mode, but in the middle they just randomly throw a new mystery prologue tier puzzle map at you. Chapter 1-9 is a really strange Fog of War chapter where you have only 2 units, Micaiah and the all-powerful Black Knight, surrounded by forests and facing an uncertain amount of foes on the way to the boss. First of all, Micaiah is made of paper and will just die, even on lower difficulties, so this chapter is really frustrating to fail on, but even if it wasn't, asking the player to play properly with their limited tools is only interesting if you have a reliable way to act on that information. This is like a much smaller version of FE6 Chapter 14. Without a guide or knowing enemy formations ahead of time, there's not really a good chance that you're going to get through this map easily. And it's a shame because this map could have been a lot of fun otherwise. You have one totally invincible unit and one totally fragile unit, and you're trying to allocate your resources to try to cheese kills out of Micaiah as much as possible and block off places with enemies moving differently based on every time you reset, they take different paths and stuff. It could have been really interesting, but it just falls flat. Thankfully, this chapter is very short. Part 2 follows up the already somewhat short Part 1 with an even shorter, more story-based part in Crimea. Most of the chapters in Part 2 are either interesting enough, unique enough, or just good enough that I can't really put them on this list, but there is one standout, and it is, of course, 2-2. 2-2 is just another boring Fog of War chapter with somewhat uninspiring units that you have to go through a cave and beat up some guys. The only really interesting thing in this chapter is that it's the debut of the torch mechanic, and while I think that's valuable, it's not really that cool compared to the other chapters in this part. A big problem with this chapter is that a ton of the units you get in this chapter are either terrible or don't come back for a long time, so it doesn't really have a lot of long-term implications on your party. Lucia doesn't come back until like part 4. Neolucci is also very unavailable for this game's campaign. Your Lagoos are very middling. It's just all over the place, and it means that your decisions on this chapter don't really have important ramifications on the rest of the campaign, which is kind of important because Radiant Dawn is the game that's all about like a 80-hour campaign where something you do in part 1 can have ramifications on something you do at endgame. A chapter like this just doesn't mesh well with that idea. Part 3 mostly knocks it out of the park and provides a ton of cool interactions between the different factions of Tellius, but there is one chapter that really just stands out as being a stinker. I'm talking about 312, the Rolling Boulders map. This map tasks you with defeating 30 enemies on easy mode and 40 enemies on all other difficulties. At the end of the day, the sheer enemy density combined with the inexplicable fact that a ton of enemies that will never reach you still feel the need to move around every single enemy phase just turn this map into a slog. The main draw of the boulders don't even do anything. They do very little damage and don't advance the game state in any meaningful way, so you're just wasting your already limited action economy by doing it. While I'm glad the game gave us an opportunity to experience what it's like tossing boulders at enemies, 3.12 is a sobering reminder that the grass really is always greener on the other side. Part 4 kinda sucks. I hate to say it because it really should be such a cool segment of the game as a lead up into the finale, but Part 4 really is just a bunch of extremely boring slogs through extremely boring maps that have extremely boring clear conditions. But really, I have to hand it to 4.3, the desert chapter, as being the most boring of those. This chapter is already boring enough because it's a desert, but it can't be forgotten that this desert holds hidden items, many of which can be very useful. The Dragon Foe scroll is located on this map. It's a scroll that is very important and has a lot of really interesting implications for endgame. There's also a Laguz gem, which is an item that lets your Laguz stay fully transformed. Your Laguz Royals don't need this, but Gifka is a unit that's pretty much on par with the Laguz Royals, but does not have their ability to stay fully transformed at will for as long as he wants to, and is very useful on them. This is also very useful on your dragons if you were trying to train them or use them for buffing. Finally, this chapter also has the return of the prodigal son Stefan and his Vague Kadi, which is one of the best swords in the game because it's an SS rank weapon that has a ton of stats on it. I mean, what do you want me to say, man? It's an extremely boring route map in the middle of a desert, which makes it even more boring. That also requires you to take your extremely fragile game over condition to the absolute edge of the map to recruit a unit that almost exclusively exists just to provide you with a sword. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain any further why this chapter just isn't good. You're in the presence of one of the few people who actually likes Lunatic Plus in this world, so maybe my perspective on this is skewed, but I really hate Chapter 2 of Awakening with a passion. There's this stupid fighter on the left side that's just impossible to hit, that's made me reset more times than I care to count, but unfortunately, Chapter 2 is not the pick for this game. The pick is Chapter 23. Chapter 23 has a lot riding on it. The Premonition, the very first gameplay you see in Awakening, features this exact part of the game. In Chapter 23, in addition to just dealing with Valadar, you also have to handle all the other enemies on this map. And that's where the problems start to rise. Chapter 23 is a wide, giant, totally open field with almost no terrain, and the objective is route. Do you start to see the issues here? There's some clever rescue dance tech that you have to do on higher difficulties to get your units out of overextension range, but those kinds of difficulty tricks are also mandatory on every other map when you're playing on high difficulties. It's just a bad fit for the game that it's in. I'm going to be providing you guys with one chapter for each of the Fates routes because I feel like talking about Fates as a whole for one map would be unfathomably disingenuous, so let's just get started. Birthright is the easy Fates route. It's the route where enemies rarely have skills, your units are strong, and the game encourages you to just relax and enjoy the story, or lack thereof, rather. Well, at least the music's really, really good. And then Chapter 27 shows up and punches you in the throat straight up. In the middle of this chapter are the goddamn Pillar Men. All three of them have, to start, Counter, Brave Axes, and Tomahawks. So dealing with them is already going to be annoying to begin with. You've got AC/DC here with Tomebreaker and Quick Draw with a Brave Axe so he can just easily nuke any mage that you have. Wamu's on the other side with Swordbreaker and Vengeance to put an end to any Ryoma strats you had in mind. And in the center, of course, Kars is holding down the fort with Axe Fair and Shuriken Breaker. You'll notice that this enemy layout is designed to shut down 1 to 2 range access specifically, and all kinds of it that you have access to, including Ryoma. This by itself would not be bad enough to really put a damper on things, but scattered throughout this map are strategists with entrap staves designed to make the Pillar Men have an easier time jumping you. And right at Garen's side are some annoying ass generics too. They're not as annoying because if you can get to Garen, you will probably be able to beat the chapter, but the maid in particular is noteworthy with her access to Fortify. I don't have an issue with difficult chapters. I think hard chapters are fine. However, to put a chapter this uncharacteristically difficult and so cynically designed to lock out all of your best strategies right at the end of the campaign is such an awful idea. The expectation that the game has built so far is that it's a vibe-focused game. The gameplay was never particularly difficult or interesting, but it looks pretty good and the music is wonderful, so most players will just coast through the game until this point just to get totally dick-punched. What makes it 10 times worse is that the actual endgame in Birthright, the literal next chapter, it just needs you to walk 8 tiles to Garen and nuke him out of orbit. It's just such a strange and ill-fitting chapter in what's otherwise a totally consistent, if boring, video game. Moving on to Conquest. I thought about it long and hard, and it really cannot go to any other chapter than Chapter 21. Most Fates chapters have two different modes. The version of the chapter that you play if you want to have fun, and the version of the chapter you play if you want to adhere to some arbitrary concept of efficiency. Conquest is usually fun in at least one of those modes for its entire runtime, usually the first one, but the one inexcusable exception is Chapter 21, The Eternal Stairway. This chapter has an infinite number of respawning faceless that you have to deal with on your way to the escape point. There's some interesting cliffside terrain that lets flyers approach from the center but forces non-flying units to approach from the side, and there's dragon veins scattered across the map that freeze all enemies on the map for a single turn. On a first playthrough, using these dragon veins can somewhat provide an interesting experience, but as time passes and on replays, you just start to realize this map really doesn't have many interesting ways to interact with it. Flyers are just so over-centralizing and strong on this chapter that they turn it into a breeze, and the previous two chapters are more fun to play with flyers, so anyone looking to even just have a good time is going to have enough flyers to turn this map into Swiss cheese. In the worst case scenario, where you don't have the flyers to handle it, it's still a seriously boring chapter where the only thing that matters is raw stats. One of the most fun things in Conquest is its matchup-reliant gameplay, where having a barracks with a breadth of options rewards you with consistent answers to a different class of enemies, but this chapter only has two enemy types, and each of them can only use one kind of weapon. The final nail in its coffin is that it doesn't really have a goal that it's trying to achieve. There's other chapters that are similarly hated in Conquest, like Chapter 19, but these at least have a central goal. For example, Chapter 19, the Kidslayer's goal is to try to fix ambush spawns and make them more fair. Now, every chapter in Conquest succeeds or fails at these goals at different varying levels and different rates, but Chapter 1 has no such luck. It's just a surface-level boring chapter in a game with no other surface-level boring chapters, and it's not making it off this list. Revelation is one of those games where the consensus is so overwhelmingly negative overall that it kind of becomes its own meme. Ask most Fire Emblem fans that aren't super familiar with the Fates fandom specifically, and they're going to tell you that Revelation is the worst game in the series. It's the ugly duckling of Fates. It's the route that you only play once out of morbid curiosity and never again. Here's the thing though, I really disagree with this notion, and I've spent a lot of my time on this platform on YouTube sort of championing Revelation, defending it as a game that's actually pretty decent, and arguing that underneath some of the jank and weird stuff, you're still playing a Fire Emblem Fates game, which makes it more mechanically sound than most games in the series. But even I have to admit that in its attempts to hit it big, to be the golden route, the favored child, the grand unifying path that ties everything together, Revelation swings for the fences and misses more than a few times. Take the infamous Chapter 10, for example. On paper, it's a neat idea. There's a big snow field that Zola's covered the map in, and you're trying to uncover it slowly and get through it while dealing with enemy ambushes. In practice, if you're trying to get the side objectives, it becomes like a half-hour ordeal where you're actually in the driver's seat for like 10 minutes of it maximum. It's not challenging, it's just tedious. Then there's Chapter 25, one of Revelation's many moving platform maps. Revelation loves these things. It loves them so much that it keeps making them worse. Chapter 25 in particular is exceptionally annoying because unlike the previous moving platform chapters, you don't really have a way to circumvent it. All the other previous moving platform chapters take place on floating islands, which means that you can use flyers to sort of cut out some of the waiting time and try to take on places more than you would otherwise be able to just by using the platforms. This also provides a little bit of an interesting push-pull gameplay where you don't want to overextend, but I'm probably giving those maps a little bit too much credit. At the end of the day, they just end up being somewhat mediocre. Chapter 25 takes place underground, and as a result, you have no such luxury. The entire map is just a slow walk while you wait for the elevator to go up, and they don't even give you any cool elevator music. It's a map that takes a gimmick that's already on thin ice and removes the one tool that could have made it tolerable. But the real champion, the undisputed heavyweight of Revelation's misfires, is Chapter 24, the Mikoto map. Chapter 24 is Revelation's attempt to fix the stealth map from Path of Radiance, and somehow in trying to do this, it manages to make it significantly worse. It's like if somebody looked at Path of Radiance Chapter 10 and said, what if we made the stealth even more unintuitive? In normal mode, the stealth actually works reasonably well. It works about how you would expect it. There's a decent number of enemies that follow predetermined patrol paths. It takes place later in the game, so you have a bunch of extra movement. There's side objectives. There are still problems with it, which we'll get into later, but I just want to acknowledge that on normal mode, the stealth mechanic itself works pretty well. However, outside of normal mode, the stealth system becomes a total nightmare. Unlike in Path of Radiance, where enemies call the guards on you and get alerted if you end your turn within their movement range, in Revelation, Hard Mode, and Lunatic Mode, enemies move and then they also calculate the range that they end their turn on. So unless you're able to properly shape, rotate, and visualize properly what the enemy range is going to be after their movement, it's going to be super annoying and you're going to be resetting a ton. It's stealth based on future prediction, not present information. And then there's the Mikoto doors gimmick. Throughout the map, there's a set of doors, red and blue doors. Mikoto tells you which door to go into throughout the map. You're supposed to believe her because she's your mom, except you're not. There's a set of doors up until the very end that you're supposed to believe Mikoto and go through the same door that she tells you to, but at the very end, you're supposed to stop trusting her randomly and then switch doors immediately to finally get to her and beat the chapter normally. Distrusting her ahead of time results in the enemies getting alerted again and you having to face a ton of reinforcements. Trusting her at the wrong time also does the same, but you're even further in the map and have probably already have enough of this insufferable gimmick. It's just an idea that's so baffling. This is Revelation's attempt at gameplay plot coherence, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's trying to tie the gameplay to the story in a way that feels meaningful, but there's really nothing to go by where it's like, oh, because Mikoto's been resurrected, I should believe her, except at the very end where I should suddenly distrust her. There's no reason for you to think that you should believe her at the start but not believe her at the end. The story of Revelation's already super contrived and meaningless and just awful. Revelation has its defenders. I'm one of them, but even I can't save Chapter 24. It's the moment where the route's ambition collapses under its own weight, where the desire to be clever overrides the need to be coherent, and where the gameplay and story finally meet, only to drag each other down into the abyss. Fire Emblem Echoes it's one of those games that tricks you. It really does. You boot it up, you hear that gorgeous soundtrack, you see those beautiful character portraits, you get swept up in the presentation, and you think yourself, wow, this might actually be the best video game ever played. And it is the best video game ever played, until you have to actually play it. Echoes has a lot of strengths. Atmosphere, story within reason, voice acting, and art direction, but map design is not one of them. Most of the maps in this game fall somewhere between mid and God just kill me now. And the Beaufort is the poster child for that second category. It's not just bad, it's bad compared to the rest of the Echoes map design, which is its own special flavor of evil. The Beaufort is a perfect storm of everything that's just wrong with Echoes' gameplay. First, the enemies just have a ton of range and are annoying to deal with even before you initiate against them. They can hit you from distances that feel like they should require FAA clearance, and because this is Echoes, where enemy face is basically a suggestion and player face is a prayer, every step you take is another opportunity for some random archer to just hit you out of nowhere and delete half your health bar depending on the unit they hit. Second, the enemy formation. It's just a full-on death ball. They don't trickle in, they don't split up, they don't give you breathing room. No, it's just one big blob. It's a coagulated mess of steel bows and bad intentions. And because they're all clustered together, you can't really pick them off safely. A unit that wants to be able to handle the Beaufort has to be able to handle at least half of the enemies in it because of the way that the ranges line up, and that really limits your options. You can't bait them out one by one, you can't even rely on terrain because the map is designed to funnel you into their loving, murderous embrace. And then there's your army. Your poor, sweet, summer child of an army. Echoes is already a game where movement can often feel like a punishment, but the Beaufort really takes it to another level. Most of your units are stuck moving 1 or 2 tiles at a time, trudging forward like they're wading through molasses. You can see the enemies, you can see the fort, you can see that you're about to get messed up, but actually getting there feels like trying to get to the end of a slow burn romance that's been going on for 15 years. The pacing is glacial. Every turn is a slow crawl forward. and the enemies just keeps pelting you from across the map. Every decision feels like it takes a long time to pay off, and because the enemies deathballing, you didn't even get the satisfaction of thinning their numbers. I understand that a lot of the Echo's castle map design is built around actual castle strategies, where the idea is to funnel all the enemies into one corridor. I understand that. The problem is, this makes for really annoying gameplay because those tactics are very effective and are very difficult to get through even if you have 15 killer bow units with Hunter Volley, which you don't have at this point in the game. The Beaufort isn't difficult in a satisfying way. It's difficult in a why is this taking so long kind of way. It's a slog, it's a crawl through a barbed wire fence. It's a marathon through knee-deep mud while someone fires arrows at you from the horizon. It's the kind of map that makes you put down your 3DS, put your back on the floor, lay down, look up at your ceiling fan, and wonder if Alm and Celica really need to save Valentia after all. Despite all the discourse and how Three Houses fans can frequently be some of the more insufferable people on the planet, it still has a place in my heart, and a large part of that is owed to the general vibe of the first route that I played, Blue Lions. Before I realized that the entire first act was just copy-pasted for each route, and it felt like each of the main game chapters was properly curated to the cast of the Lions, heading into the time skip was unbelievably foreboding to my 14-year-old self. 14? That can't be right. I must have done some fucking math wrong there. Hold up. So the game came out in 2019. It's 2026, so that's 7 years. 21. Okay. Wow, I really was 14. Fuck. Turns out I really should have been worried for a completely different reason than Dimitri's inevitable mental break. I should have been worried about Reunion at Dawn, the next chapter on this list. Reunion at Dawn tasks you with handling a large group of extremely powerful enemies with what looks like just Byleth and either Seteth, Claude, or Dimitri, depending on the route. Edelgard doesn't care enough to beat up bandits, apparently, and to be honest, she probably does have better things to be doing. Back to the chapter, however, this is just full of enemies that are extremely annoying to deal with, and it does not scale well with difficulties. The assassin spam is extremely difficult to handle, and while the Verdant Wind and Silver Snow players will probably be slightly better off considering that they have access to a flyer guaranteed, not only do Azure Moons get riddled with a Footlord, he's also forced into a brand new battalion which spawns at full HP, which is absolutely devastating news for all the Battalion Wrath, Battalion Vantage users out there. The opening turns on this chapter are just totally brutal and can completely lock you out of being able to experience the second half of this game. If you train the wrong units or if your team composition isn't suited for the map, you can easily soft lock your save file. And because I know a lot of Three Houses players, and I know a lot of them that are not familiar with other JRPGs, they are not used to using multiple save slots. Add to this the fact that in classic Three Houses fashion, it messes up a crucial anti-softlock mechanism present in the 3DS games, which allows you to lower difficulty at any point, and it just doesn't let you do that in this chapter. So if you don't have a save file before the time skip where you can lower the difficulty, you are totally out of luck and you are completely locked into this chapter on whatever difficulty you chose. It's a difficulty spike with no warning, no safety net, and no respect for the player's time. Engage is a game that has a decent amount of strengths despite all the shit that I talk about it, but it has a lot of weaknesses too. And one of the biggest weaknesses that it has is trying to copy things that it has no way of properly understanding. One such occurrence takes place in Chapter 19 of Engage. This chapter has you in a corrupted port town in Elusia, attacking the port town from your starting point of a boat. Sounds cool, right? Well, not really. There's two really big problems on this chapter. The first problem is the side objectives that just make no sense. There's a few villages inside of the miasma terrain that you can visit, but when you visit them, instead of giving you the item, it spawns a group of hostile enemies, one of which has the droppable item. This is very obviously, mechanically speaking, a ripoff or a retrain of Chapter 17 of Birthright. And when I played this, I could do nothing but laugh. Copying someone's homework is fine, but when you copy homework, a big part of it is making sure that the person whose homework you copy actually knows the answers. Birthright Chapter 17 is just not a cool map. It's kind of boring. It's very lame. There's just no reason to try to reheat that map's nachos. And it makes this retrain even worse because this retrain also introduces a second issue, which is the choke point. This chapter has a one-tile choke right next to the start that is so obviously abusable as to be hilarious. This wouldn't normally be an issue, and I just go the you control what buttons you press mode, but the fact is that outside of this choke point or some classic emblem ring abuse, there's no real ways to interact with the chapter. The miasma creates such a giant stat swing, and it's so all over the place that it becomes kind of impossible to overcome, and the terrain strategies that you're afforded to let you deal with it, like Corrin, are really hard to facilitate while maintaining action economy because Corrin isn't inherently an excellent ring for combat units. The ballistas also don't have enough range to let you actually take advantage of their ability to clear the miasma either. You just end up slowly sitting on a ship, killing one enemy at a time, and while it does provide a great outlet to let you train your underleveled units, the gameplay loop is genuinely just not interesting or engaging in any way, shape, or form. And that's the tour, the bottom of the barrel, the dregs, the scraps. The maps that made me question my life choices, my strategies, and in some cases, my sanity. Fire Emblem is a series I genuinely love, a series full of brilliant ideas, unforgettable characters, and some of the most satisfying tactical gameplay ever made. But even the best series has its low points, and these maps are proof that ambition, experimentation, and occasionally pure chaos can go very, very wrong. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys in the next video.